Hello there. Thanks for joining me on another edition of Real Money Stories, the podcast where we speak to people from all different backgrounds about their money journey, their money beliefs, and their highs and lows. I'm your host, Jason Butler, and this week I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Catherine Morgan. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, Jason. Great to speak with you today.
Well, I am honoured actually to have you on the show because you have become nothing short of a superstar. I remember the first time I met you, I sat next to you at a meal somewhere at a conference some years ago, and we got chatting and, etc. And I thought, yeah, very interesting lady, and we'll get into your backstory in a minute. But I am honoured because you've got a fantastic podcast. Do you want to just tell everyone what that is?
Oh, thank you. That's really nice of you to say. Our podcast is In Her Financial Shoes.
Yeah, and it is really, honestly, it's a really interesting, get some really interesting guests, but also it's a slightly, I would say, the slightly more feminine side of money, which I like. And as a man, I listen to Woman's Hour and I listen to your podcast, right? So they're my two little guilty pleasures. So it's well worth, it's not just for women, but it does have that feminine slant, doesn't it? Which makes it good.
Yeah, I think what probably makes it feminine as well. I mean, my audience is women specifically in the consumer space, but I think a lot of the subjects we talk about are kind of the peripheries around money, because it's the meaning we attach to money, isn't it, that creates the feelings and the thoughts and the behaviours. So it does make for very interesting guests because we can pretty much open that out to guests that talk about financial psychology, behaviours, therapy, self-worth, lots of these kind of concepts that sit around the idea of money, which I hugely believe if we can actually understand ourselves and how we make decisions, and not just in money. You know, a lot of the time the relationship we have with money is very similar to the relationship we have with ourselves. And so I'm a massive believer in the more inner work you can do, the more that will actually help you from a financial perspective too.
And for your sins, for your day job, you've got sort of two hats, haven't you? Apart from your superstardom in the social media space and podcasting, you've got two hats, haven't you? Do you just want to explain what you do?
Yeah. So the two main parts of the business that we spend most of the time on, one is on the consumer side. So 4 years ago, we set up the Money Panel really initially as a blog for me to just write how I was feeling about money and my personal journey, and actually some of the frustrations I had with the work that I had been doing prior in the banking sector, with focusing very much on financial products. And so we have built a business now which is very much about consumer education, but not just on the financial education. It's about actually focusing predominantly on improving your relationship with money, because I really believe that if you can layer financial education on top of our beliefs and behaviors around money, that's when the magic happens. So we've developed a business with a number of different services that people can get involved to help to develop their relationship with money. So we have the podcast, we have weekly blogs, we have a weekly YouTube channel, we have a Facebook community, we have weekly lives in there, we have a membership, we have courses, masterminds, all sorts of different programs at different price points for people, so that wherever they're at, they're able to get support with their financial situation. And that was really important for me because I'm a massive giver, and we'll perhaps get stuck into that. My relationship with money is very giving. And so I had to build a business that enabled me to help everybody, because that's my mission, that's my purpose, is, to create big change. And I can't do that if I'm just sitting in my room doing one-to-one work with one-to-ones. So that was really important for me to build that kind of business. And then the other hat that I wear, which has kind of developed really off the back of building that business, is a lot of financial advisors over the years have come to me and said, well, that's amazing. Like, I want to learn more about that. So I've been mentoring financial advisors on a one-to-one basis. And during lockdown this year, we decided that right now is the time to launch a training program to actually help financial advisors to start implementing the skills of a financial coach into their practices.
Great. I mean, I know that you've got a great following, and that Facebook Live group. I know that people, if you don't put it on, there's a sort of a queue of messages saying, "Are you okay?" Is that right? I mean, the people have become really into it. It becomes a sort of a self-fulfilling sort of self-improvement. It's almost like a cult, really, isn't it? I think and that's good, because it means that we're now speaking about money, and that's what this podcast, my little podcast, is all about. It's about actually just talking about money. Men, women, old, young, high income, low income, whatever it is, entrepreneur, stay-at-home mum, whatever it is, let's just talk about money. Let's share our thing. It was interesting because a lady put a review for last week's episode, and she just said, I've just come across this podcast and I love the story. And the story was of Leanne Liu, who came to the UK as a boat person in 1979, which is very topical with, the migrant thing over the channel, and how she felt about money and how embarrassed she felt about not having stuff, and how she actually built a life one step at a time. So that's great. So look, let's get into, I'm very nosy, as you know, and I know a little bit about you. And you did, when we had a good chat that first night, we felt like old friends. Take us back to very young Catherine, and kind of what it was like growing up, sort of in terms of what you understood about money, what you understood about lifestyle, what messages you heard when you were very young.
Yeah, do you know, in preparation for today's podcast, I was kind of sitting and reflecting and thinking about my stories around money. And actually, there's a lot of stories that I haven't ever shared with anybody. And I've done a lot of internal work over the last 4 or 5 years specifically around helping to improve my self-worth. And it was really interesting for me when I sat back and thought, what did I actually learn about my parents growing up? And when I grew up, so I'm one of 4 children. I've got a twin brother who now lives over in Australia. He emigrated to Australia when he just finished his GCSEs at sort of 15. My dad had emigrated out the year prior to that. And growing up as a family of 4, my parents separated when I was very little. I think I was about two years old when my parents separated. And it was a very messy divorce, not very nice at all. And my mum then met my stepdad, who she's now married to, and he had 2 children. He lost his wife when the children were very little. And so it was kind of like 2 kindred spirits that had lost partners in different ways, had come together. And then we kind of merged these 2 families together, and we moved house when I was 10. And I remember living in quite a big house actually in Milton Keynes, which we actually bought from, it was like a liquidation purchase. Like some Japanese people had built this house by this lake, which sounds very glorious. It's not on the lake. It's like half a mile from the lake. And they went bankrupt. So this house came on the market at quite a reasonable price.
So
and my mum sold her.
From the bank,
yeah, basically. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And my mum sold her house. My stepdad sold his house. And we merged the 2 families together. And I remember at the time, I remember writing in my diary at the time, like I kept diaries for years when I was a kid. And I remember writing in there that if I can convince my brothers and sisters not to move house, then we can stay. And I'd written out this little action plan. It was like a bit like a Home Alone, like the little analysis thing that he does to get the burglars. I was like, well, how can I convince my brothers and sisters to stay where we are? And consequently for me, I had a lot of change at a young age, up until the age of kind of 10. And then I started it was a junior school actually. I was there for a year, and then I moved to secondary school. And I had a really bad time at school. I was really badly bullied pretty much at every school I went to, but particularly at secondary school. And I'm pretty significant bullying. I was physically beaten at school. I had death threats on the telephone. Like it was just a really nasty experience.
Just nasty, horrible. Yeah.
Just nasty girls. Yeah, nasty girls. And I think probably the reason why is I was quite studious. I've always been a perfectionist. So my handwriting was like meticulous. It just looked like a piece of art. It was so meticulous. And the reason that I was displaying that kind of behavior was because I didn't have any confidence in myself. And I would always judge my success on other people. I'd always compare myself to other people. Yeah. And even as an adult, that really resonated when I was growing my business, for example. I was always looking for other people's approval. I was always looking for people to kind of say, yeah, no, that's okay. You're okay to do that, before I would have the confidence to go and do something.
Extrinsic motivation. So you're seeking the validation. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, but consequently from a financial perspective for me, the reason I share that is because I used money as a tool to make myself feel better about myself. So one of the, probably not the earliest experience, but certainly in my teenage years, because I felt so bad about myself, when my dad left to go to Australia, actually, I went into quite a deep state of probably depression. And then my brother left and I basically shut down. I stopped eating. And I suffered then about 10 years worth of eating disorders.
You probably felt a slight sense of abandonment, didn't you, as well? That both a trauma and abandonment. I know you were with your mum, but it's still, because lots of people go through that. That may have manifested itself as well, yeah?
I think I was always daddy's girl. So my dad was like, he was... Yeah. Yeah, I get quite emotional thinking about it.
Of course.
He was, I would say probably at that point, I probably went through some PTSD at that moment of that real traumatic event of my dad leaving. Now we had various conversations about him going and, he flew us out there when he moved and, so it wasn't like he abandoned us, but certainly I feel that at that age, losing your father and your twin brother was quite traumatic. And then I was being bullied at school and it sounds like a real sob story, doesn't it? Yeah. But it's like, I used money then, right? I thought, right, how can I feel safe? And how can I feel secure? And so for me, I would shop and I would buy clothes in the hope that, well, if I put something on that makes me feel skinny, then I'll feel worthy. I'll feel loved. Yeah. I'll feel protected. And it was almost like I created this comfort zone around myself. And what happens is that any experience that we have, the brain always looks for more evidence to support a belief. So my brain just constantly kept looking for more and more evidence that you're not worthy enough, you're not good enough, you're too fat, you just need to lose weight. And I then went into like a 10-year slump, basically, of eating disorders and not eating and using money to buy clothes to make myself feel better. And I ended up in my overdraft every month. I ended up with about £30,000 worth of credit card debt by the time I was in my late 20s. And I was a financial advisor at the time as well. So you can imagine.
I thought it was just £33,000 of credit card debt by the time I was 25. Unbelievable. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I was about to go into podcast mode there and ask you some questions about that.
No. So here's the thing. The manifestation of the feelings that you were trying to assuage, and you were using spending as the crutch or the plaster or whatever you want to call it, the soothing agent. The outcome of that was a huge amount of consumer debt. So we go through our 20s. I mean, that's quite a formative situation. As you were going on this journey to financial hell, let's put it that way, or difficult times. What was how did you transition out of school and kind of the world of work? I'm just interested to know, while that was all going on, that 10 year of spending, tell us about how you transitioned out of school tell us how it's all right.
I'm going to Pablo's house.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Tell Daddy though, can you close my door, please, darling? Thank you. Sorry, Jason. I have to cut that bit out.
That's all right, no. So tell me, we've got obviously this situation where you got into the consumer debt and that was surging your feelings through spending. But what else was happening in your life and how did you transition from school to work and relationships and family and that sort of stuff over that period as well? The twin track?
Yeah, James, it's all a bit of a blur, really. Like, I think there's probably bits of my life I've just mentally blocked out. But I studied A-levels. I did theology, history and English. I remember thinking, oh my God, what have I done to myself? All essay-based A-levels.
With that handwriting, why not?
Well, perhaps. But I remember I really struggled with my A-levels. I didn't quite get the predicted grades I wanted because I wasn't eating. Basically, my brain was completely starved. And I applied for university. I had a place to study law. And I remember at the time thinking, I don't really know what I want to do. And actually, as I've just said that out loud, it's just triggered something, because the reason I think I wanted to study law was because injustice is one of my key values. If anything's unjust in the world, I feel like I'm on a mission to go and solve it. I love all like the police dramas and crime documentaries, and I'm really intuitive. So I'm really great at actually piecing together like an hour before anybody else has figured it out. And that probably was why I felt driven to study law. But at the time I was with a boyfriend. I've been with him since I was 15 and he didn't want me to go to university. And when my brother emigrated to Australia, I thought, well, I'm just going to go to Australia. I'm going to go and join them, but I'll do my A-levels first and then I'll go. And so I did, actually. I did my A-levels. I took a year out. I thought I'll take a gap and then I'll go to uni. I flew out to Australia, and when I was over there, I went over there for 5 weeks, and I decided, right, I'm going to apply to emigrate. So I flew back and made an application, and then I met my husband. And during that period, I worked in retail for a couple of years when I was studying at college. And then I got my first job at the bank when I was 18, because that's where my sister worked. My sister worked at a bank. So I got a job as a cashier. And within 9 months of being a cashier, I was seeking the next progression, the next promotion in my job. And I remember I then got upgraded to be like an account opener. And this is when I kind of learned about credit cards and overdrafts and loans and all these things I hadn't really heard of before.
Yeah.
And I did that for literally only a couple of months. And I remember seeing this advert for a mortgage advisor. And so I applied to be a mortgage advisor when I was 19. And I got rejected. And the board, this was at Halifax, that they actually said to me, no, you're too young. You can't be a mortgage advisor at 19. Come back in 2 years' time. And I kind of sat there thinking, well, that's a bit weird to decline somebody because of their age. And so I basically left, and I went to work for Abbey National, who brought me onto their succession planning program. And so I self-studied in my own time for my mortgage advisor qualifications, and then I did that for a couple of years. Got the 2-year itch, which seemed to kind of come up every 2 years. And then I went to studied my financial advisor qualifications, did that, was a financial advisor for a couple of years, got the next itch. And that's then when I decided to go and work abroad. So I wanted to travel. I didn't want to stay in the UK. I felt quite claustrophobic a little bit, actually. It was just before the credit crunch hit. So it was quite a good time, actually, to come out of the UK and just before all the RDR qualifications hit for financial advisors as well. So we were quite kind of relaxed in the Channel Islands, which is where we actually moved out to. So financially, I guess in my 20s, I didn't really have any awareness about my problem. I didn't believe I had any overspending challenges. In my head, I was like, okay, I'm in my overdraft, but it's fine because it's an agreed overdraft. I'll wait till I get paid. I've seen all the clothes I want to go and buy this month already. I'll get paid, spend all my money, and then have to wait another 29 days until I was paid again.
So you were paycheck to paycheck at that stage?
Literally paycheck to paycheck, yeah.
And so you were doing you were going through the loops of the different steps in your career. And then when did you meet your husband? Was that as you were going through these stages, and Yeah,
so I met my husband in 2001, I think it was. Is that right? He's going to kill me now if he listens to this and I've got the year wrong. I think, yeah, something like that. We've been married 10. So yeah, that sounds about right. Okay. We met in 2001. So I was about 21, I think, at the time. And it was in that period where I'd applied to go and emigrate to Australia that I met him. And we met at work. He worked at Abbey National at the time. He was the branch manager. I was the mortgage advisor. And I remember him coming into my office on his first day of work to introduce himself. And I'd just come back from Australia, so I was nice and brown. And it was literally a physical connection. Reaction. Yeah. We were both completely lost for words. I was like, oh, hi, nice to meet you. Shaking his hand, thinking, oh my God, you're gorgeous. And I remember going home. It was the year before I moved out, actually. And I remember going home and saying to my mum, oh my God, the new branch manager's gorgeous, but he's got a girlfriend. And literally within 3 weeks, he dumped his girlfriend that he'd been with for 4 years and asked me out on a date. And that's how that relationship blossomed.
Oh, what a player. Yeah, really interesting. So, how interesting. So, okay. So then as your relationship, blossomed and you realized you had a thing for each other, is that when you decided not to go to Australia and to stay in the UK?
Yeah.
And then the two of you moved to Jersey, did you say? Is that right?
No, so at that time, so I decided not to emigrate. I then bought my first house at that point. So that the year before that, I had a car accident and I had £3,000 compensation paid. And I used that compensation to put a 3% deposit down. So I had a 97% mortgage at the time. Put that down as my house deposit, bought my first house for 117,000. And I actually only lived in the house for 2 years, I think it was, maybe even less. And I ended up selling it. And then I moved in with Gareth, my husband to be. And that was interesting because obviously when you buy your first house, you then start to really have the responsibility of managing your own money, right? But I never knew how to do that. No one had ever really taught me how to manage money. I was never given the opportunity to ever manage my own money up until I think I was 20 or no, probably earlier than that, actually. I remember my dad used to pay my mum a maintenance. He used to pay her £60 per month maintenance. And I was never allowed to have that responsibility of that money myself, which is quite an interesting thought, actually, because I wonder how much that influenced my responsibility going forward around money. But it was always given to my mum and my mum would manage it. So if I ever wanted anything, I'd have to go to my mum and ask her permission to buy something.
You hadn't learned the agency and the control of making your own decisions and your own mistakes. Right, okay.
No, never.
So you had that house for a couple of years and then you and Gareth decided, you were long term, right? So what did you do? Move in with him in his house or did you buy a house together?
Yeah, so I sold my house, moved into his flat, and we then sold his flat, and then we bought a house together about a year later.
And had you fessed up to him about the shopping, sort of, how can I put it, routine and the credit card debt? I mean, how would that sit with him?
Yeah, at that stage, actually, it was probably its fairly early infancy. Like I was living in my overdraft every month, and I had a few £1,000s on credit cards.
So you weren't really serious about the shopping at this stage. This hadn't really taken hold.
It had, but I was managing it reasonably, I would say.
Yeah. It was low level.
Yeah. I would say that the one of the interesting things about Gareth is very, like, he's the most chilled person you'll ever meet. He's so relaxed. And I remember actually, even when we first met, we went to Paris. We flew out to Spain and we went to Barcelona. And I remember in Barcelona going to the Burberry shop and buying a Burberry handbag. And he was like, oh, get the scarf as well and get the purse to go with it. Like he was almost gently encouraging that, but not in a negative way. It was just because he was like, yeah, if you want it, just get it. I don't think he really understood my probably overspending habits as much. The intensity. Yeah.
So this is interesting because, and first of all, thank you for being open with it, everyone, about this, because when you get into a relationship, you aren't just bringing together, your baggage and your history and two different sets of, thoughts and everything, but you're bringing that financial habits or skills or lack thereof or predictions or whatever they are, you're bringing those to the party. And very few of us ever have sit down. We think, first of all, do we like each other's company? Do we have similar values? Do we find each other attractive? Do we think we could build a life together? We don't actually then think, hang on, what's your financial personality? What's mine? Where are the gaps? Where are the flashpoints? Where is going to be the future rows? So you developed, obviously your relationship, and then, I mean, how did you deal with your finances? Did you keep yours completely separate? Did you merge them? Did it happen over time? What way did you approach it?
I can't remember, actually. I know we've always had our own bank accounts, always. I can't remember at what point we had a joint account. Fairly early on, I think. I think it's when we bought our first house. We had a joint bank account where all the direct debits and bills would come out. And then we had our own separate individual accounts. And that's the way I was always taught at the bank, actually working at the bank, that have all your pot, have your pot. So have your joint account, all your bills go out of there. And then you've kind of just got your own personal accounts. And then you decide, based on what you're earning, how much you're both contributing into the bill pot. So that's the way we've always kind of worked. So I guess in a way that probably harbored that relationship because, well, he wasn't really seeing what I was spending. And likewise, I wasn't really seeing what he was spending either.
So it was off balance sheet. It was like a sort of Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. So on the face of it, everything looks okay. You've bought the house. You've stumped up whatever cash both of you can do. You've got your salary. You've got your bills account. But you've got your secret stash of your own money, stroke your own credit facilities. So how did that then evolve? And when did that come to a crunch? Did it come to a head? What happened?
Yeah, I think the reality of the situation came to its head when I was living in Jersey, and I was a sales manager out in Jersey, and after 2 years, I fell pregnant with my first son. So we got married in Jersey. Gareth proposed to me in the middle of Peru just before we emigrated out to Jersey. It was like the most beautiful proposal. It was awesome. And then we got married in Jersey, and then I fell pregnant on our wedding night. We found out while I was on honeymoon at the top of this volcano, where I told Gareth he was going to be a dad. And it was just like completely surreal. You couldn't make this stuff up. It was awesome.
Lovely. Yeah.
And so I fell pregnant. But just before we got married, I walked into the coffee shop one morning on my way to work, and it was opposite the branch. And there was this leaflet, and it's mentioned about personal styling. And I remember taking it home to Gareth. It was very near my birthday, and saying, I'd love to have one of these personal styling sessions done. Maybe that would make me feel better about myself. And so he bought me this gift voucher. I had this lady come and spend the day with me, and she weeded out all of my wardrobe. She told me what I should be wearing for my body shape, what colour makeup I should wear, all of those things. And the last session that she did with me, she left me sitting on my little red couch in in this tiny little cottage in Jersey. And she left me sitting on this couch surrounded by about, 8 bin bags worth of clothes. And I just cried my eyes out. And it was like someone had given me permission to get rid of all this stuff I've been hoarding for years and years and years to make myself feel better. And we also had some personal family stuff going on at that point of some other stuff. And those two things coming together, I just sat there and thought, whoa, like this is finally, I feel like I can crack this. I can actually focus on my self-worth more than anything else. And so I flew the lady over who trained this lady to come and train me. And she spent 2 weeks with me in my home, and I trained to be an image consultant. And I set up my first business on the sideline. I was still working at the bank at the time. I then fell pregnant. And when I was on maternity leave, I basically ran consultations from my home, started building my social media accounts, learned lots of lessons in that first business that really helped me in my business today, about how to build an audience and I was working with women. I was helping women to improve their confidence around their bodies after they'd had children. And actually for me, I think that was really pivotal, because not only did I actually understand that my self-worth was probably the most important thing about money, the connection with money was my self-worth. If my self-worth was better, my net worth would be better. Mm. So that was the first thing. The second thing was that building a business, I felt all of a sudden that's what I should be doing in life. And I then started to feel quite disconnected with the work I was doing at the bank. And that, I think, made another difference, because I was starting to see the benefits of running a business and actually having control over my money and having to be responsible around money. Whereas as an employee, the mindset was completely different. It was like guaranteed income coming in every single month, haven't got to even think about it. It's just there in my account. Whereas being self-employed, I was like, oh, okay, I've got to actually create this business to make money for myself. So the whole meaning around money completely changed.
Interesting. I just want to go back to the bin bags. So the bin bags personified all the hurt that you've been trying to, or the wounds or the feelings that you've been trying to. Is that essentially when it hit you, that actually was a personification of all of the stuff you've been trying to deal with, but it actually come out in that session in those bags?
Yeah, there was definitely a light bulb moment for me. Definitely. Yeah.
And I just want to just sort of share some thoughts there, is that sometimes we get epiphanies like that, don't we? And we can put our finger on them. But sometimes the realization is more gradual. In other words, it doesn't happen overnight. It perhaps happens over a couple of months or a couple of years. And everyone's different, and that's okay. The key is that everyone at some stage has some issue that they need to deal with. The issue is not that they got it, but that they use it to move forward and use it and take it for what it is. So, okay, so you did the image consultant thing, and how did that change your relationship with money and this whole spending thing? Did that have a positive impact, or was it a holding position?
I think it had a number of different impacts or influence really on me. I think from what I've already shared, and it's interesting because I've never really been asked that question, and I'm kind of trying to think now, how did that impact on my relationship with money? I think that was definitely the starting point of actually understanding more about responsibility around money. And then I think also when I became a mum, everything kind of changes when you become a parent anyway, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's not about you anymore, it's about somebody
grow up,
else.
don't you? You've got to be a grown up. Yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely think that I mean, responsibility around money is a massive topic in itself. That word responsibility can mean so much. And for me, I would definitely say that was the first seeding stages of having that responsibility. And I think what happened after that is that I then had my first son. It wasn't a good birth. I had post-traumatic stress disorder after my labour, and I went into an awful state of depression after he was born. And then we moved from Jersey back to the UK. And then I fell pregnant with
the sun to the rain, from the blue skies to grey skies and mountains. Yeah, what's not
crazy, right?
Yeah. Okay. So your second son was on the way. Yeah.
Yeah. So second son was born, and that was it. Actually, from a financial perspective, that was interesting because when we moved back to the UK, the house, by that point, before we moved to Jersey, we'd actually bought our second house. So we had one house, the first house together, lived in that for 2 years, of course, because then the 2-year itch happens. Then we moved to a bigger house. We moved into a 4-bed house, right at the top of our income affordability. And then we rented the house out while we lived in Jersey. And the tenants we had were pretty good. Came back to the UK, moved back into this house. And all of a sudden, I was like, why are we living in this 4-bed house? I know we had one child by that point, but I was thinking, what a waste of money. I'm spending all this money on a mortgage and we don't need this house. And slowly, though, that sort of change around stuff and status and spontaneity
and the definition of success, right, as well, the definition of what it is to be successful. Oh
yeah, completely. That started to shift to experiences, and actually a lot of that I believe came from my dad, because my dad had the big house, the flash cars, the Jags, the Porsches, the nice holidays. And I think my way of actually, when he left, was that, well, maybe if I have some of this stuff in my life, I'll feel loved. I'll feel he'll be proud of me. And
acceptance.
Yeah. So there was definitely a lot of that in there for me, and that started to shift. And then when my second son was born, he was very poorly as a baby. We nearly lost him when he was born. He had an infection at birth, and we were told there was a 50-50 chance he was going to survive. And then when he was 5 weeks old, we woke up one morning, actually it was the 1st of October, and I had someone coming around that morning to do some baby hand casting sessions. And he just wasn't himself. He was grunting in his sleep, making these weird noises in his sleep. He was kind of pushing into his stomach like he was constipated. And we just thought he was constipated. But he wasn't feeding very well. And to cut a bit of a long story short, that particular morning, I took him out of his Moses basket to have his hand castings done. And he just screamed at me. Absolutely screamed blue murder at me. And I remember telling around to my friend and saying, something's not right with him. I'm going to book a doctor's appointment. So I did. I quickly did this hand casting. And as I took his hands out of his baby grow, his hands were like ice. And I remember thinking, why are his hands so cold? And quickly wrapped him back up again, popped him in the Moses basket. My friend left and I walked back over to the Moses basket, and he was just lying completely still, slightly grey, not moving at all. And his eyes were just like blinking like this. Like every blink was painful. And I checked his temperature, and his temperature was like 39.8 or something like that. And I put him straight in the car seat. I rang my husband and I said, I'm going straight down to A&E. I'm not taking any chances.
Yeah.
And within 20 minutes of arriving, his skin started to mottle. And I'll never forget the moment when they put me on a wheelchair. They wheeled me into resuscitation. I remember the double doors opening, resuscitation being above my head, and thinking, what is going on? And all of these doctors started swarming around the beds, trying to get some blood from Thomas. And this one doctor kept using this word sepsis. And I remember thinking, what the hell is sepsis? I think I know what it is, septicemia, right? I remember watching a Home and Away episode when I was younger, like the Shane, this character in Home and Away, died of septicemia. I remember thinking, oh God, that sounds pretty awful. Yeah. And I didn't know as a mum that was the biggest killer of newborn babies. I didn't know that the symptoms of septicemia or sepsis are cold hands, cold feet, grunting in their sleep. I didn't know that. And I remember thinking, like, I felt stupid as a mum, a second mum. Why do I not know this? And because I'm a very optimistic, positive person, I was just like, right, what needs to happen? Right, what can we do? And just go straight into solution mode. And I guess being a financial advisor as well, you go into that, putting the solution hat on. And 2 weeks later, when we were discharged, he was diagnosed with bacterial meningitis. So they did a lumbar puncture. They came into our hospital room about 4 days in, actually, and said he's got bacterial meningitis. But because we caught it so early, he was really, really lucky. He was pumped with antibiotics for 2 weeks, but he was absolutely fine. But when I came back to work a year later and back at home, I remember sitting there thinking, how many people feel like this about money? How many people feel stupid that they don't understand the jargon that we use in financial services? And going back to that whole injustice piece, I felt there was an injustice in the world that up and staying in negative patterns because they didn't understand it, and they felt judged and guilty and shameful to admit it.
And it's the emperor's new clothes, right? People don't want to actually say, hang on a minute, is that lifestyle that someone is telling you on the news or telling you on the soap or on social media or whatever, actually, what's that got to do with me? Who's to say that's right? I'm not stupid. And there's an interesting thing, just to segue to that, is sometimes people look at people who haven't got much money and think either they're lazy or stupid, or people who've got loads of money that they're somehow gifted and smart, right?
Yeah.
It may or may not be the case, but the assumptions people make, they could have just been lucky, right? They could have just been lucky. Some people are lucky with money, right? Despite all their uselessness when it comes to energy. So you felt like that. You thought there were parallels between the kind of feeling impotent about your son's medical situation and how people feel about money. But at that stage, you must have got to the crescendo of your kind of out of control spending. So how did the two things collide with you feeling that epiphany of, do people feel like this, and actually getting real about your own situation? Were there parallels there?
Yeah, that was it really. So when I came out of hospital, the kind of ugly head of the spontaneous impulsive spender reared its head again, because I was out of control. I couldn't protect him. I felt like I couldn't protect him as a mum. And the only way I could control how I felt was to actually, ironically, get out of control with my spending. And so what happened in my teenage years was I would control my food, and I actually dealt with that, and then actually thankfully don't have that issue anymore. But what happened is it kind of shifted from one to the other. So it became rather than trying to control food, I tried to control money, but I got out of control. And it became a comfort blanket. It was so familiar to me living in my overdraft. It just became...
And having the bags of the new gear and the first feeling of opening it all. And did you say to your husband, when he said, is that something new? You said, no, it's not. It's something I've had in the cupboard ages, but it was new when you put it in.
There was never that secrecy. There was never the secrecy of like, oh, I had it for 2 years and you didn't notice. No, always very honest about it. But and we both knew that we had credit cards that were kind of out of control.
Right.
And when we lived in Jersey, we actually, because we earned really well in Jersey, taxes were lower, we earned really well, we actually paid off the credit card debt. And we saved £30,000 in savings, which we then spent on our wedding, which I know is a lot of money to spend on a wedding, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. And what happened is we then looked back on that and we said to ourselves, God, if only we'd made that decision 5 years earlier, we could have had another 30 grand in the bank and we wouldn't now be struggling to pay them more. Not that we were struggling, but we didn't really have any spare money. We were just kind of, we weren't particularly frugal. We would just, if we wanted something, we would just get it.
There was no structure. You just
structure.
happened to be keeping your head above water because the money coming in, money going out.
Absolutely.
But it still paid to paycheck. Yeah.
Yeah, no budgeting whatsoever.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was another thing for me, is that the word budgeting always put me off. I was like, why do I want to restrict my money?
Boring people do, right? Boring people do budgeting. Yeah. You get a life, you got to live.
Exactly. And I can't remember which book I read. I read a book and somebody talked about spending plans. And I was like, I quite like that, because actually it's about me giving permission to allocate money where I want it to go, rather than it being restricted.
Well, I have my smart spending system, right? Smart spending system is you tell the money where you're going to go. You make allowance for fun, you make allowance for the future, but you also make allowance for essentials, and you can vary them and you can adapt it. And it's not a straitjacket, it's just a guide, right? Smart spending, absolutely. Telling the money where to go before you wonder where it's been,
Yeah, absolutely spot on. Yeah, absolutely.
Did you feel at that stage when you suddenly this came to you, and you and Gareth, did you have a proper conversation about this, or was it a gradual realization between the two of you?
There was never like a specific moment. It was it was just a gradual culmination of a change of thought and belief, and then habits. Because, and this is what I found, and this is why I feel quite, I love talking about this, because I experience this myself. When we want to create a new habit or a new behavior, often what happens is we just focus on the outcome. We focus on, I need to set up a budget planner or go to the gym or start eating more healthily or whatever. But actually, if you don't really believe it, then it's never going to stick anyway. It's never going to happen. So I think for me, I just saw this very gradual, several different experiences, all kind of a bit like cooking a cake. Like all of these ingredients were very slowly coming together. So then, for that kind of, almost like you imagine when you're baking a cake, like you've got this gentle machine kind of stirring everything together. And then gradually it all seemed to stick together. And then it was like, then I started to think, okay, so maybe I should create a spending plan. And then I discovered Starling Bank, and I thought, okay, I'll set up my pots. And then I was building the business in the background as well. And slowly I'm starting to see my savings pots go up and up and up. And I was like, I've never experienced this before. And initially I spent it. I was like, well, I need to get rid of this money, because going back to what I was used to, my comfort zone was scarcity, not enoughness. So I would just find any excuse. Oh, well, the windows need redoing. I need new picture frames. We need to redecorate this room. Something would come up, an excuse.
But you weren't used to aging your money, were you? You weren't used to aging your money. In other words, always having the expenses you're going to need next year, the year after, always there, ready. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Beautiful analogy. I wasn't used to that. And now I understand why, because I understand that if it's your comfort zone, your brain will look for more evidence to support that belief. So you have to work on changing your beliefs first. Then you create the new habits, and then they stick. And that's when you can change some of those patterns of behaviors that haven't served you.
So there was a gradual realization. What would you say of, in that stage of going from being in debt, because you did get out of all the debt, didn't you? You cleared all the debt.
Yeah.
And when you did clear the debt, first of all, how did you feel when you got clear of that legacy, right? I mean, how did that really change you as a person, your relationship, your feelings about the future?
Do you know, it's interesting. I think that we should always celebrate things like that. But I didn't really celebrate it. And I think... It's really interesting. So for me, financially now, I'm in the position for the first time in my life I've ever been in where I've got investments that I'm not dipping into, I'm not taking back out again. I've got really good positive cash flow in my business. I generate between 10 and 20,000 a month in revenue, and I'm taking profit for myself. And I share that quite openly because I've never been in that financial position before. And even now, though, if I had a £20,000 sale this week, for example, it doesn't mean anything to me, because the meaning that I attach to money is no longer there. That meaning of self-worth that I attached to money for so many years is no longer there. the impact that it has for me is when I can see transformation and when I can feel like I'm empowering somebody to change amazing things in their life, that's where the value sits with me. So it's interesting for me that my relationship with money now it's not about the money, whereas it was 10 years ago. For me, it was always about, well, if I have more money, I'll feel better. But now it's not about that. So it's really interesting how, because of all the work I've done around my self-worth, and I've had years of therapy around lots of different things that have happened, and that for me has changed my financial situation. It's not because I'm earning more. It's not because I'm spending less. It's because I've spent so much time focusing on the inner me, the inner child, healing some of those past traumas and things. And that's been at the core of changing my relationship with money. And that's what I really believe, that if anybody's listening to this and feels like they've tried over and over and over again to get out of debt cycles or out of cycles that are not serving them, it's possibly because you're focusing on the behaviors and not focusing on actually uncovering some of what's behind the meaning that we're actually attaching to money. And that was what it was for me completely.
And that's so true, Catherine. I mean, here's the big thing. I really hate it when I hear people talking about, money gives me security, money gives me freedom, financial freedom, and all this. I hate it. You are free and you are secure without money, right? Because no one will starve, right? It may not be a great existence, and you do, obviously, having poverty is miserable for most people, real absolute abject poverty. But you get security from within. And it sounds to me like that's where you got to. So you've got to fix yourself, because money wants to come to you. Money is abundant. There's plenty of money. It's just time we don't have huge amounts of. Whereas people live like there's unlimited time and we got limited amount of money. But when you stop chasing money, it comes to you, doesn't it? It comes to you. And when you're intentional.
It does, and people think it's really woo-woo, don't they? Because you have people that talk about the woo-woo-ness about, well, just go to bed and wake up and money will sit in your bank account. It is really about.
Yeah, we're not talking here about The Secrets, rubbish like the notebooks. We're talking here about this fixing yourself to be abundant, so that those opportunities that you probably before sabotaged, or that those unhelpful spending stories you told yourself are sabotaging yourself, or you're not looking after your physical health, so therefore you can't really run your business properly, whatever it is. But so it's fixing yourself, isn't it?
It is, and it's also, when we think about the self-sabotaging beliefs and things like that, sometimes it's difficult for people to really understand, well, what does that, how am I self-sabotaging? What are my self-sabotaging beliefs? And I think a lot of it goes back to what we tell ourselves is what will happen. If we tell ourselves money doesn't grow on trees, I have to work hard, then we will just look for more evidence, because that's how the brain works. At a scientific level, the brain will always look for evidence to support those beliefs. Because the brain doesn't like anything complicated. It will push it away. And when we think about how the brain actually works, it's really fascinating. So if you start telling yourself something that you want to happen, it will happen, because your brain will look for evidence. It's a bit like, I remember as a teenager when I split up with my first boyfriend, and it was my choice, but I was devastated. And all of a sudden, everyone around me were in relationships. And I felt like the only person who was single. Like, I'm sure loads of your listeners will resonate with something like that. And that's because at a scientific neuro level, you're creating those neural pathways for your brain to believe that that is the case. So this is really powerful stuff. I've qualified in NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. And this is specifically what this helps people with, is actually rewiring the brain to believe that it's possible, which sounds a bit weird, but it's so true. And if you can really understand, that inner child, we're trying to unprogram what we felt as a 6-year-old version of ourselves. So actually, it's a 6-year-old version of ourselves that needs love, that needs support, not the adult version of ourselves. And that's really powerful.
And really, if you think about the Stoics, they say you've got to understand, first of all, don't get attached to stuff, because it'll all go. Your judgments are everything. Even Hamlet said that, nothing has a meaning, and the meaning you give it. But the other thing, just to finish off on here, is that we're not into this woo-woo kind of affirmations and goal sheets and stuff. They may be helpful, but that's not the thing. We're not talking about the law of attraction and stuff. We're talking here about understand how bad things could be. Like, you anticipate crap happening in your life. Anticipate your car. It's not if your car goes wrong, or if an emergency happens, or if your income drops, or if you get ill. It's going to all happen, right? At some stage. So assume it. Fix the house, the sun, while the sun's out, fix the roof. So if we go into it not with rose-tinted spectacles, optimistic because we want to make the most of our life, have a positive roll of money, but also assume that they're going to have blow-ups and cock-ups and financial problems. So if we're going realistically, it's not pessimistic, is it? But it's just kind of like, when is there going to be another coronavirus? Something like that. There'll be something like that every 2 or 3 years, right? So I just want to finish up about coping with adversity and sort of getting it in perspective when it comes to your money.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're not very good at is looking at the future. We just want everything now. Well, right, exactly. And I think when we think about your future self, this is why I have an issue with things like retirement, because there is no such thing as retirement. And this is why the language needs to change in this profession. Because if you talk about, well, what do you want to do in 6 months' time? What kind of holidays do you want to go on? And thinking about, taking a 12-month calendar and just sitting there and thinking, well, what did you spend in the last 12 months? Is that likely to be repeated in the forthcoming 12 months? Yes, great. Put it in the diary, go and set up a pot and get some money popped into that pot as soon as possible. What else did you spend in the last 12 months that you might be spending the next 12 months? What things might just come up every couple of years? It's kind of planning ahead, but it doesn't have to be overcomplicated. Goal planning is, I hate goal planning.
I do as well.
Goal planning for me is about a finite moment in time. Well, who knows what's going to happen?
And things change, right? And also, if you don't hit them, you're putting off your happiness till you do get there. And if you don't get there, you're a failure. Goals is for losers. Well, let's focus on living. Yeah, I agree.
I think goals are...
I'm joking. Have goals. Do have goals, but they're overrated. Don't hang all your hat on them. That's the key. Sorry.
They're also very masculine. Like, the goals are very they have to be smart.
Don't even get me there. Don't. We don't do goals. We just do positive, healthy behaviours that help us live a full life. So look, Catherine, I've got to let you go, I know, because you're an in-demand lady. Before you leave us, do you want to leave us with any kind of what I call nuggets or amazing pithy pieces of wisdom that are going to sort of be up there with Churchill and Gandhi and people like that?
Oh, goodness. Wow. What a tall order.
Set expectations. I know you can do it. Anything else before you go?
I would say from everything I've shared today in the interview, and thank you for having this platform available to share. I can't think of any other podcast that enables people to share their stories in this way. So thank you. And it's quite therapeutic, actually, to kind of talk about some of this. From my experiences, I would say the most important thing is two things. One is about what I call getting financially naked. It's about stripping everything back, inside and out, and understanding your relationship with yourself, because actually your relationship with money is a reflection of your relationship with yourself. So rather than focusing on the money, focusing on healing your inner self, focus on healing some of those. You don't have to necessarily have significant trauma in your background. Anything, divorce, moving schools, moving house, new relationships, career changes, redundancies, all these things are trauma to the brain. And if they sit there unresolved, they can have physical repercussions on our body and mental repercussions. And if we can really spend some time thinking about those and improving our inner child, that inner worth, your financial position will absolutely 100% guaranteed improve. So getting financially naked inside and out, I would say, is key. And the second thing is it's the small steps of imperfection. We talk on the podcast, small steps, big wins. It's the small steps of imperfection that make the difference. If you're sitting there right now thinking, well, I don't have enough money to save for my holiday that I want next year, start anyway, because the process and the habit of getting started with imperfect action will create a good positive result, and it will motivate you to do more. And that self-motivation, again, is really important, particularly when you're looking at building money for the future. If you can just start those habits, it doesn't matter whether you didn't do it when you set up, if you didn't set up a pension when you were 18, who cares? It's the past, it's gone. You can't do anything about it.
Where you are
From where you are right now, look at the next right step of imperfect action. There you go. There's my my Gandhi quote.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I'm going to put that in the book. I've got the Money Miracle. It's coming out hopefully towards the end of the year. I've picked so much good stuff. Obviously, I've got to quote you on that. So that's going in. That is definitely going. I'm going to rewrite one of those chapters to shoehorn that quote in.
Oh well, send me a copy and I'll give you a testimonial thing for it as well.
Good stuff. All right, Catherine, look, you're a superstar. Thank you for giving up some of your valuable time. So if people want to go to your website, what's the website address?
Yeah, sure. So we have two websites, themoneypanel.co.uk. That's where our blogs and courses and things are on. And then we've got catherinemorgan.com, which is if you want to follow me, if you want to book me as a speaker, or you want to understand more about the podcast, then either one of those websites.
Catherine is a fantastic speaker, whether it's in person post-COVID or virtual. She's brilliant. Book her. Don't even think about it. I'm telling you, I've seen so many speakers in my life. I've been around a long time. She is brilliant. She knows what she's talking about, and she's very humble, as you probably heard from the show. Catherine Morgan, superstar, mum, business person, just general good egg. Thank you for being on the show. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks, Jason. You too.
Thanks for listening. If you want more money insights, do visit my website at jason-butler.com or connect with me on Twitter or Instagram at JB the Wealthman. See you next time.